So hello everyone. Today I'm going to be in conversation with Dr. Mirjam Hauck, who's joining me for this week's blog and YouTube channel. Before we get stuck in, Mirjam, please introduce yourself to our audience.
I'm Mirjam Hauck. I am a founding member of UNICollaboration. I'm also a seasoned virtual exchange scholar. I've been doing work in the field for over 2.5 decades now.
Wow.
And most recently, for the last 4 or 5 years, I have concentrated on framing and theorizing the field of critical virtual exchange.
So why critical virtual exchange, Mirjam? Do tell us more.
Well, I think critical perspectives in the sense of critical resistance are underexplored, still underexplored in virtual exchange. So this is one side of my motivation. But I also made a promise to myself that in the last decade of my professional life, I only want to do work that is socio-politically relevant. And it is only through critical virtual exchange, that is virtual exchange through the social justice and inclusion lens, that we can do socio-political relevant work in our field. But just think about the fact that virtual exchange practices are often still electives that are only available to a limited number of students, and that virtual exchange-based internationalization at home, it is not inherently inclusive as a result of that. It is prone to Western hegemonies, to power imbalances among the participants, as any other form of online learning and hybrid education.
So how does critical virtual exchange aim to address these issues? What exactly is it?
Well, first of all, I have to admit, I'm not the first one to come up with this concept. Our colleagues from the Stevens Initiative in the US, Kastler and Lewis, have started to look at virtual exchange through the equality, diversity, and inclusion lens for the first time. So critical virtual exchange explicitly sets out to address social justice and inclusion, both at individual and at institutional levels. So it wants more equitable and more inclusive student exchange experiences. And there are certain characteristics, certain defining elements that make a virtual exchange a critical virtual exchange. So, for example, the use of low bandwidth technologies, the systematic inclusion of students that are often underrepresented in virtual exchange, and internationalization at home virtual exchange, that those tend to be the ones from low socioeconomic backgrounds. Then also a systematic alignment of exchange project work, of exchange topics with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal. Another defining element is, wherever it's possible, the integration of student outreach work, where students work locally with businesses, with non-governmental organizations, with charities, and they bring that work into their exchange work with their international partners. And then also, most recently, another defining element, translanguaging approaches. So not code switching, I mean really translanguaging. So yes, all languages that are available get used, but also any other means and modes that are available online to make meaning and communicate should also be more systematically be brought into the critical virtual exchange experiences.
Okay, Mirjam, so you've outlined some of these elements and criteria that make it critical virtual exchange. I'm quite interested, or particularly interested, in what you're saying about taking it out of the walls of the university into charities, into businesses, so outside of the field of academia. So do you have, and also the translanguaging, do you have concrete examples of some critical virtual exchanges that you can tell us a bit about?
My favorite example that speaks to most of the criteria that I have just talked about is an exchange called Reading the City in its first iteration, and then Making Your City Sustainable in its second iteration. And in this exchange, it was actually a trident. University students from Argentina, from Poland, and from Sweden. They were involved in critically exploring the different urban environments, their respective different urban environments, through the lens of United Nations Sustainability Goal number 11, which is about making your cities inclusive, safe, and resilient and sustainable. So in both iterations were 7-week-long try them, interdisciplinary collaborations. There were students of multimodal communication from Argentina, tourism students from Poland, and teacher education students, English, to become English teachers from Sweden. So they worked in 10 international teams with 1 to 3 participants from each of the institutions, and they did use English as their lingua franca. But I have to say that Malin Klimang, one of our colleagues and one of the 3 educators who designed and implemented this project, she said the focus was very much on content, on communication, and not so much on language acquisition. So they really made an effort to use multimodal and multilingual resources in that exchange.
Right.
So what did they do? They first familiarized themselves with the online tools in preparation for the main project phase, and then they moved on to exploring the potentials of multimodal meaning making by sharing and critically analyzing popular and official tourist websites from their respective cities. And the focus was very much on the content of these websites and on the stories and on the values they promoted.
Right.
And then the students also looked for examples on how their respective cities figured in aesthetic texts, such as in literature or in poems, poetry, in music. But here they were more out looking for critical or maybe even controversial issues. So this could be issues of poverty, of segregation, of crime, of prejudice. And then in their cross-cultural teams, then they designed their own multimodal city texts and city websites based on the critical theme they had chosen. So that was the first iteration. And in the second one, in the Making Your City Sustainable, again, the same 3 educators, they actually put more emphasis on critical agency and critical digital citizenry. But again, they explicitly aligned themselves with the Sustainable Development Goal number 11.
So bearing in mind virtual exchange and critical virtual exchange, what advice would you give to educators when they're designing their virtual exchange, how to bear in mind to make it more of a critical virtual exchange?
Look where the challenges are in your immediate context. Look where the socio-political challenges are. Look where the students can make a meaningful contribution also through their collaborations in the local outreach element to solving real world problems. This is what I always say. Let's move outside the comfort zone.
Absolutely.
Let's move beyond the food, fashion, folklore, and festival that very often is still the entry point, the very first virtual exchange experience for educators and students. Having said that, I don't want to be unfair. There are more and more colleagues who have cottoned on to this, to the importance of the criticality in our work, and start to see it as a unique opportunity to do work that addresses the challenges we are confronted with on a daily basis, including the many wars and serious political conflicts globally.
I was going to ask you this, but I think I may save it for another interview, Mirjam, because it begs the question about how to deal with conflict and peace education. But I feel I want to dedicate a different interview just to that, if you agree to come back.
That's fine. About that. Yes, that's absolutely fine.
Like if I'm asking you that now, I'm going to open a can of worms.
Yeah. But that is definitely the very latest I'm exploring. That is the systematic use of critical virtual exchange for global citizenship education, again, critical global citizenship education and critical peace education as part of this. but there is a lot to say about this. So definitely let's keep it for a different time.
Okay, so thank you today for your time, Mirjam, and I'll be glad to welcome you back to talk about this next
Yes.
topic then.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you very
Lorenza.
much.